I want one. So I recently started following this YouTuber, Bernadette Banner. She specializes in historical sewing using historically accurate methods. She's made a great deal of video and she has a very pleasing aesthetic. I really like it. And a while ago she posted this little video. And in this video she created a quote-unquote pirate shirt that is basically a men's shirt. And when I saw that video, I realized I wanted one. Well, wanted is not the right term. I needed one. And so I set out to make one. Now, I'm no seamstress. I have done some sewing projects in the past, but they were all quite simple, like a long skirt or a pajama pants. So it wasn't my first rodeo. Unfortunately, I am bad at rodeos. And so this was a step up for me. So you can expect to see me fail and try again many times in this video. Because I will try very hard to follow our instructions, but it might just not happen. I also chose not to follow her historical methods of creating and sewing this shirt because I just couldn't be bothered to hand sew everything. Hand sewing is the bane of my existence. I despise it. I only do it when I absolutely need to. So when possible, I'll be using my trusty sewing machine. And without further ado, let's just jump into it. I'm making a pirate shirt. For this recipe you will need some fabric, some pins, a white thread with a needle, and some fabric shears. Also, since I am not a historically accurate person, I will also be using a sewing machine. In here I have the pattern that Bernadette used. You notice that she wrote the way to get every measurement on yourself, which is what I did here. Here are my measurements, don't judge me please. So now that my measurements are taken, I am ready to transfer them onto my fabric. And for that I laid down my fabric on my apartment's floor. I also laid down on my fabric because it's quite comfortable. It is a white cotton bedsheet that I found at the Salvation Army for $1.50. And to mark my fabric, I do not have fabric markers, nor do I have tailor's chalk and all that bullshit, but I have a dry erase pen, so that's what we're gonna use. I also don't have a ruler, but I have a measuring tape and a human anatomy book that I bought for school last year. I still use it a lot, but it has straight edges, so it'll do the trick. Let's start tracing, shall we? And a lot of tracing we did. I started measuring the body that was 30 by 60. I used my trusty book to trace straight lines. You cannot see it in here because I am out of frame. I have a lot of talent and I should really buy a tripod. And it is at this moment that I realized that my fabric was barely 60 inches in width. It was in fact 58 inches instead of 60. I decided that a 2 inches difference from the pattern was not the end of the world and that I would just live with it. Once I was done tracing the 60 inches line on the fabric, I chopped it off and had a beautiful 30 by 60 rectangle that became the body of my shirt. So I've cut the first piece, it's the shirt's body. I didn't realize that 60 inches was that big. And so now it takes my whole fabric width, if that makes sense, But all the other pieces that I have to draw and cut are doubled. I need 2 of each. Therefore, I'm just gonna fold my fabric in half and trace only one. Therefore, when I cut it, I'll have 2 identical pieces. So at least if they're not perfect, then they'll be symmetrically imperfect. I don't know if that's what I'm intended to do, but at this point I'm just rolling with the punches. Once my fabric was folded in half, I started measuring the other pattern pieces, which were the sleeves, collar piece, and the cuffs. These were all rectangle, which were fairly easy to trace, and then chop the pieces. Easy as that. I chose not to use Bernadette Banner's method, which was to pull one single thread from the fabric so as to have a perfectly straight line. I assume it is very easy when you know what you're doing and when you're actually talented, but I figured that I didn't really need to have perfectly straight lines, because even if my lines were straight, I'd still have to sew in a straight line, and that is not something that I'm able to do right now. And so I decided that it didn't matter too much if I had wonky lines, since I was gonna sew in wonky patterns anyway. Sorry, Bernadette, please don't feel offended. Alright, so as you can see from my outfit, it is another day for this pirate shirt project. Yesterday I cut out all of my pieces. I forgot to record it, my apologies. And now I want to pin my pieces together before sewing them. And right now I'm working on the gusset. The gusset is this little square of fabric that goes in the armpit. I want to pin it to the body of the shirt, but the gusset here is designed for men's pits, and unfortunately, or fortunately, I do not have men's shoulders and pits. Therefore, I'll have to adjust this. To do so, I need to put my gusset at about 3 inches from the top seam of my shirt's body. This 3 inches will accommodate for the sleeve that will come here and poof up. And I want the measure from here to the end of my gusset to be the length of the tip of my shoulder to the end of my armpits shirt. So I'll be measuring that, and that measures out 7 inches. Therefore, I'll come back on my shirt, measure out 7 inches, and I want 3 inches for my top sleeve, and I want the gusset to end at 7. That means my gusset has to be a square of 4 by 4. I shall be recutting both of my gussets and pinning them on the body. Alright, I have recut my gusset pieces. I have also marked the 3-inch point from the top of the shoulder. I will now be pinning the gusset to the body of the shirt. Okay, so I am a bit dumb. I thought I had to pin the gusset to the shirt's body. I was wrong. After reviewing Bernadette's video, I realized I was wrong. I need to sew the gusset to the sleeve. And I did just that. I took my gusset piece, wrong side in apparently. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I pinned both of the wrong sides together so that the right sides would show once we flip the fabric. I pinned it one side to one edge of the sleeve, and then I folded the sleeve so that it made a cylinder. Yeah, cylinder? English is hard, guys. But I made sure it was sleeve shaped, and then I pinned the adjacent side of the square, if that makes sense, so that one triangle was in the sleeve and one triangle was above the sleeve. Just watch the video that I unfortunately filmed kind of crooked. I need a tripod. So I have pinned my little gusset to my sleeve bit, and the point of the gusset is that when I put my sleeve on and it's tied to a shirt's body, and it makes me able to raise my arm very high, because if this was just this, I'd get stuck here because of the fabric. So now the gusset makes me able to raise my arm, and it disappears when I put my arm back down. Now this is the color pieces. I stacked them together, and I will sew 3 of the 4 edges shut and then flip it around so that I have one color piece. I will also do something similar to the cuffs, where I will fold it in half, and once these are folded in half, I will stitch these 2 edges together so that this edge can get the sleeve tucked in it. Sewing the cuffs and the collar weren't that hard in themselves, since it was just sewing in a straight line, but my fabric had some problems. For some reason my needle would keep snatching some little threads, and it was quite infuriating, not gonna lie. I had to start over again a couple times. It was also the first time I used this particular thread, and I think my machine was not quite calibrated for it. You can see here I'm trying to show you the bottom thread that got really messed up, and I just undone it all. And boom, that's one cuff. That doesn't make any sense.
It was at this moment that she knew. She fucked up.
This is way too small to be a cuff. This is not gonna fit. This is the piece of fabric that's supposed to be the cuff. So it's supposed to go around my wrist and close. This is not closing. So I'm a dumbass. Now, as you may see here, this is my cuff piece. It is 6 inches by 8 inches. 8 inches being the circumference of my wrist plus 1.5 inches. Now, I had to fold this in half so that I could have my cuff piece like this. See, that works. What I did with my first piece is that, like a dumbass, I folded it this way for no apparent reason other than I'm dumb. I will be undoing these 2 seams, folding it back into the right way, and starting again. And instead of going to work on the cuff, I decided that I had enough frustration for that moment and that I wanted to torture myself by doing some needlework. And so in this weird ass angle, I'm showing you how to turn the edges of the fabric, this is inside the sleeve, so as to hide any loose edge, because right now the edges may not be fraying that much, but once you wear it or once you wash it, the edges can fray a lot, which is frankly quite ugly and also a bit damaging for the fabric. So by rolling the edge over themselves twice, you actually hide this little bit of free fabric and you make your garment a lot more secure. I had some mats and finagling to do with the gusset, since it was 2 seams in the beginning and that they fused at some point. And so since they merged, I had to use some thoughts and logic so as to roll it and hide every single loose edge, but I think I succeeded in the end. You might notice I cut one flap very close to the seam, and I leave one flap a bit longer so that it can fold twice on itself. And once this bit of fabric is folded on itself twice, you have to pin it there and then grab a needle and some thread and sew it in place. You can sometimes do it by machine, even though some seamstress will be very mad at you for doing so. This is called finishing a seam. You can finish your seam with machine most of the time. Unfortunately, since this was a sleeve, I could not fit it into my machine, and therefore I had to do it by hand. It wasn't that long. It took about 30 minutes to complete one whole sleeve. It just was very annoying to me because I am not that good at hand sewing. You might not see it very well on this image because it is white on white, but if you squint really hard, you might see that this is the result of a felled edge, and it looks pretty neat, I think. I enjoy it. I also added those spawn of Satans, those little square at the end of the sleeve near the wrist where the sleeve splits up to accommodate for my hand going in and out. And these were hell to put on because they wouldn't hold in place. They are teeny tiny. I kept messing up. It took me like 45 minutes to do one square, and I had to do one on each sleeve, inside and out, and one on the slit at the front. So I had 5 little squares to sew in, and every single one of them was shit. Okay, so now I have my sleeve fully sewn in and with the edges felt, and I am now ready to take this from a big sleeve to a poofy sleeve. And for that I ran a gathering thread all the way around my sleeve, and with that gathering thread I'll be able to just pull on my thread and make it poofy. You can see here that I have the sleeve that I did not gather and the sleeve that I gathered in the cuff. Look at how neat this is. I really like it. It's all coming together. And then it was time to pin the sleeve to the shirt's body. And to do that, I had measured 3 inches from the top of the shoulder where my top sleeve would go. You notice that there's a lot more fabric than 3 inches of fabric. That is to accommodate for the gather. This is what's going to give me my poofy sleeve. I also need to sew in this side and then hem it just like I did with the inside of the sleeve. Okay, so I've pinned one sleeve on the body and noticed several problems. For starters, this is way too long. And I think the reason it's way too long is also the reason I can barely feel my hand right now, because my circulation is shut off here because I've had made a mistake with the gusset. As you can see, the gusset is over here right now. It is supposed to be over my armpit. My armpit is here. I'm gonna de-sew and re-sew some shit. I'll be back.
A few moments later.
I'm back with some good news. I have taken some seam apart on the body, given myself more space to place the gusset, and now everything is falling right into its place. The seam is holding on to my shoulder. I can move my arm freely. I have blood in my fingertips. I see this as an absolute win. I then gathered the top part of my sleeve for it to fit in the 3 inches that I left myself in the top of the body. You can see here that to run a gathering thread, you just go over, under your fabric, pull the thread in, and once you're done with that gathering thread, if you pull on the thread, it will wrinkle your fabric and give you all those little lovely gathers. Once my gathering thread was through and that my shoulder was gathered, it was time to sew it to the body. It's at this moment that I realized I had no way to put the shoulder seam under the foot of my sewing machine, and therefore I would have to do it by hand. But I had been fighting this monstrosity for way too long today, and so I decided that it was enough for today. I have made a terrible mistake. You may see here that I finished one sleeve. It looks very nice. And you may see on the other fucking side where something terrible has happened, but I don't know why. I don't know what happened. Now I gotta unsew this sleeve completely and redo it. The problem is I hadn't tried it on before finishing the inner seams, so now the sleeve is completely finished on the inside. I have to undo it all. This took me like 8 hours. So I've decided that unsewing and resewing my whole sleeve is way too much work, and before I do that, I will if I need to, but before I do that, I'm gonna try to just cheat my way into beauty by pulling a bit of the shoulder over the seam, and hopefully that'll give me the same effect that I have on the other side. Now I just finished cheating one of the sleeves. Can you tell which one's cheated and which one was originally made like this? Me neither! I decided to move on and try my hand at the collar. This on top is the collar piece that has to go on the opening that I made in the top of the shirt's body. You might notice that this piece of fabric is awfully small compared to the big opening. I didn't notice it on the spot, but I spent several hours fighting my shirt and the collar would not fit. So yesterday I gave up on the collar pieces because it was getting late and I was tired. And late in the evening I had a thought that maybe the reason why my collar sat so wrong on my neck was because it was too short, and so I made a bigger collar piece. Now the small one is the collar piece I was using before, and this big rectangle is the new collar piece I made. I'm gonna try to pin it on the shirt to see if there is an actual difference or if I was wrong. I don't know what to do with my hands.
You're rolling.
Ah! Guys, it worked! I don't know how I did it, but with a lot of finagling, I made my collar work. As you can see, this is not what Bernadette did, but it is what I did, and it kind of works. And now I still have some pins in my collar that I need to replace by some actual stitches, because right now wearing this shirt is very much uncomfortable. Some of the pins are pinning through my skin. Yeah, so once I stitch the shoulders and the collar, all I will have left to do is the closures on the wrist, and I will have a pirate shirt. Now would you look at this beautiful thing I created? I sewed the collar in. I also tacked the little flaps onto my shirt so that they wouldn't unfold and reveal too much of my cleavage to the world. I don't have that much and I would like to keep it private. And now the last thing I have to do for the shirt to be complete is to add a button and buttonholes on the cuffs. Now for the cuff buttons, I went through my button stash. I think every seamstress has a button stash. You just accumulate them through the years. Unfortunately, I am at the beginning of my sewing stages, therefore my button stash was quite small and a bit sad, but I still found some lovely buttons that I had to choose from. These are the 3 final choices, and I chose to go with the middle ones, the purple ones, since the white ones were too simple and the green ones were too small. And to show off the finished product, I decided to go outside to do a glamorous photo shoot. I went to a park near my apartment. Now I might look beautiful on those photos or a bit awkward, but it was in fact minus 10 degrees Celsius out. I froze my ass off and I had to put my winter coat and my toque back on in between every photo. A big thank you to my boyfriend that was in incredible sports and that did most of the filming in this video. He was also the photograph for my glamorous photo shoot. And thank you also for being one of the 3 people that are currently subscribed to me. I appreciate it. And I will leave you on this beautiful footage of me twirling around in the snow. A happy new year to all. So I'll see you next week. Bye bye.